for agreeing to spend some time with us. Really, thank you for joining in an extremely busy schedule. Given the task force has all the responsibility of protecting us from the COVID onslaught, I think this is one of the times which is sort of once in a century or once in a lifetime, and the COVID pandemic has really impacted all of us in more than one ways, economically, health wise, fear wise, and so on and so forth. So this is probably one of the events which will go down in the history as once in a century kind of event. So in the context of that, lots of discussions have happened over the economic impact and other such impact. But from our side at Equirus, we thought that it will be very interesting to also get a medical perspective. And we thought who better than Dr. Oak to give us that input. For those who are listening to this conversation, quick introduction to Dr. Oak. In addition to being one of the most successful pediatric surgeons, he also was a director of all the municipal hospitals in the city of Mumbai. He now, of course, has been appointed by the government of Maharashtra as head of the task force to fight against COVID and save us all from the COVID situation. Uh, Doctor, everybody knows that the COVID thing is one of the most serious impacts on our lives. Uh, from our side, which is more financial community as well as the business community, we've talked a lot about the economic impact and so on, but wanted to get your inputs on the health aspects of this entire thing that is happening. The numbers are whatever they are. They are increasing right now. We hear that a significant portion of the cases are in Mumbai and then in Maharashtra. So, as the head of the task force, how do you see this going forward? I mean, do you see this getting worse? Do you see this getting better, or where are we in the life cycle right now?
First of all, Ajit, thanks a lot for giving me an opportunity to interact with you. And it is true that this is one of a lifetime event that is happening to all of us. I think our generation was fortunate enough to witness the turn of the millennium. And then I think this is second, something which is as big as that. So you asked me, where do we see ourselves now? If you look at the way the pandemic has progressed in other countries, it follows a parabolic pattern. There is a crescendo that goes on increasing, then it reaches the summit. It stays at a summit with a plateau for some time, and then it starts descending. If you ask me where we are somewhere very close to that summit, but still not at it. Little proximal to it, little anterior in the lines of surgery, little before that. Therefore, we have seen increase in the number of cases. We have seen increase in the number of positive tests coming. And if you have more of the cases coming up, the deaths are also going to be high. But there is a silver lining here. Because of the multitude of interventions that we have done over last about 2 months, I think the fatality rate is now reducing. When the task force started its work somewhere around 13th of April, the fatality rate of Mumbai was somewhere around 7. Today it has dropped down to 3.2. Well,
Interesting.
Even that is high. For me as a doctor, every death hurts me. It's like I'm defeated. The death has defeated me. On every day, on an average in Mumbai, we lose about 35 to 40 people. And I won't rest till I'm able to get this down to somewhere around 10. That would be acceptable. The second important rate that is talked in terms of epidemiology is called as case doubling rate. That's a duration in terms of days for which the cases virtually double in their number. Now, more is the doubling period, better is your work. When we started, we were very close to about 3.7 or something, which is dangerous. Because when a city goes below 3.5 and lesser than that, then it's a really, really terrifying situation. From there, from 3.7, 3.8, we have been able to pull Mumbai up to about 10. But I still want to take it ahead to the level of at least about 20. That's a safer way of looking into the near future. So yes, we have traveled, but there's still a lot more to achieve.
Sir, absolutely. I mean, we are all looking forward that this thing comes down and really thanks for that. One of the things that we always look at, like you said, in other countries it had increased, then plateaued, and then came down. Some of the other states, like especially we always look at Kerala, who notably had the first case recorded in the country, but also has moved rapidly to contain the entire pandemic much better than most other states. How would you sort of articulate that, and are there any lessons to be learned for the general public in terms of the behavior and so on and so forth from those kind of situations?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have seen the Kerala pattern. We have talked to the experts from Kerala. And though there were initial thoughts expressed whether we are having a different serotype in Mumbai of the virus and all those things, I rest it aside. I think it is the literacy rate of Kerala, the conscious feelings of the citizens to remain locked down inside their homes, and the more socially responsible behavior that they exhibited virtually led to a very, very successful lockdown part of the state and a complete containment of an area or of a zone, which I think in Mumbai, and in Mumbai everything is difficult. And why it is difficult? That is because the number of unorganized dwellings and that particular sector in Mumbai is humongous. And that is the reason that today, if you see, we have achieved successes in skyscrapers and societies, but we are still struggling with the slums. That is the problem of Mumbai.
Sir, I'll just want to seek your opinion on one point you made, which is the literacy in Kerala being high. Is that also causing the task force and the workers who are on the front line to really educate the people because of lack of literacy? Would you attribute a significant portion of what is happening in Mumbai to just lack of knowledge because of the lack of literacy? Is that a fair assumption to make?
I think in the initial days, yes. But I must say that the Mumbai Corporation, the government, they were very, very proactive. And therefore, the different types of IEC material that was evolved and the manner in which it was communicated. But there are limitations to which you can do with that. And particularly in the lanes and cross lanes and by lanes of Dharavi, anything percolates and penetrates with great difficulty. So knowledge cannot be an exception. So therefore, at times there, now we have adopted different strategies. And one of the finest strategies which has been applauded even by the Delhi team is we used our Pulse Polio volunteers. And they go and visit every household and go with an instrument called as a pulse oximeter. It's a small instrument. It's something like this, which goes and fits into your finger. And on the top, it gives you a reading of the oxygen saturation of that person's body. Ajit, till today, in last about 10 days, in 24 wards of Mumbai, more than 32 lakh of populace has been screened by this particular way. And we have been able to identify about 1,116 persons who were more than 55 years of age, who had comorbidities, either a diabetes or a hypertension or hypothyroidism, or they were obese, and I never cared for that. And their pulse oximeter readings were lower than 94. They were hovering between 90 and 92. Now, these are the potential vulnerable people. So we took them out and we took them to the hospital. Some of them developed symptoms. And when we did the COVID test on them, it came positive. So they were treated. So where the literacy was not helping us, some amount of legal avenues like this came to our rescue. If self-help does not come from within, it needs to be enforced. And that is what is done in this example.
So this is absolutely, the frontline people are doing a fantastic job in coming up with such unique or interesting ideas and making sure that we are all protected. So I have two related questions. One is, would you recommend instead of a temperature check on a regular basis, would you also recommend for people like us to regularly check on the pulse oximeter as the oxygen saturation as one of the indication is number one? And second is when these people are going in the field, slightly different dimension. When these people are fighting in the field, given our country's situation and so on, are there enough ammunition like PPE kits and so on and so forth that are available to make you feel safe when you are at war with COVID?
Well, you asked me two questions. Let me answer them chronologically. The first one you asked me is about the manner in which we should scan and screen the populace and ourselves. Look at COVID. What symptoms does COVID present with? Is it a very strong virus? Not at all. It's a timid virus. The problem is not with the COVID. The problem lies with the comorbidities that we are having. And they are, as I said, diabetes, which is uncontrolled, and India is a diabetic capital, hypertension, which is uncontrolled, hypothyroidism, and obesity. The symptoms with which this disease presents are only cough, cold, person who is sneezing, person who may be having little amount of fever, a general sense of ill-being, what's called as malaise, sometimes a loss of taste on the tongue, and loss of nasal sense of smell. That's all. Now, these are very, very general symptoms which anyone would neglect, which anyone would just pass on. Now, these are the symptoms with which the disease starts. And if you are above 55, if you are having any one of these comorbidities, as I just now talked about, the disease progresses with astounding rapidity. Someone who just had very mild symptoms starts feeling little dyspneic. He starts that he is making efforts to breathe. Now, this is very dangerous. If this happens, he must be shifted immediately to the hospital. The progressions are so rapid that in the morning, if you take an X-ray chest, it might just show a small white patch. And the same person in the evening, if you take an X-ray, the entire chest, both the lungs are completely white and opaque. You remember in the early days when the things were shown on the television, at that time, there was a person standing in the mall and the next minute he just drops down. And that was a kind of a rapid progression that he goes into a phase of hypotension, severe respiratory distress and complications. That is the role of that pulse oximetry. So when nothing is very overt, if the pulse oximeter reading is not above 95, you must consult a doctor. Okay. That is the answer to your first question. What was the second thing that you referred to?
Second question was sir, more on in terms of you as warriors.
Yes. Yes, we as COVID warriors, COVID yodhas.
Yes.
It has been proved beyond doubt and published in all good journals that if a COVID yodha or if a doctor or a technician or a nurse protect themselves with a PPE, That's that personal protection equipment, which has got a headgear, an N95 mask along with that, goggles, hand gloves, a completely covering suit, which is one piece, and good shoes or shoe covers. Now, if you wear this, then even if you operate one of such COVID positive patients, it is unlikely that you will contract it. Most of the healthcare workers who got COVIDs got them accidentally because either their gear was suboptimal or it was incomplete. So therefore, a good PPE is the best way to avoid contracting corona. Now here is again a silver lining as far as India is concerned. You know, N95 mask usually is available at rupees 45. Come pandemic, and I am asked to spend 170 to 200 rupees per mask. The PPE gear was available somewhere around 1300 to 1400 rupees per gear. And it was extremely expensive, to the tune that my about 100 bedded hospital used to need about 1.5 lakhs of PPE per day, rupees. So the budgetary provisions that my parent organization asked me to do for the next 6 months blew a hole in the budget by 2.4 CR. Now, what do? You can't pass on all these costs to the patients because then the healthcare would become expensive. And then again, you would have a problem. So one silver lining that we saw here was that Make in India project started. Several small industries, home-based industries, ladies who in our Marathi we call them as Mahila Bachat Gat, they took to this. Several tailors in the suburbs of Mumbai took to stitching good cloth masks. With the result today, I can get a decent quality PPE in Mumbai for about 550 rupees. So if you ask me, my objective is to produce an N95 in India for $1 cost and to produce a good PPE in India for a $5 cost and export it.
Interesting. So it looks like over a period of time, the availability of these protective gear for the corona warriors is there and is happening. And related, sir, if you really look at Mumbai's situation, which is where most of the concentration, like you said, in slums and so on is happening. In your opinion, are we reasonably well equipped in terms of the quarantine facilities, treatment facilities, and so on? Are we still sort of lacking and we need to do more? Where are we on that chart?
Ajit, looking at the proportions with which corona hit the rest of the world, I think nothing is adequate. See, what has corona done is that it has blown the myth in my mind that Europe and US are best in their health sectors. I can today proudly say that we are as good as them when it came to tackling of this pandemic. We were wise, we were prudent, the lockdowns were advanced, intimated, and quickly executed. That's the first advantage. Second thing we saw that we now need more and more and more number of beds. So what has been done in the last about 2 or 3 weeks is we have augmented the capacity of all the hospitals, of all the ICU beds that have been available. We have built filled hospitals of 1,000 bed capacity in 3 big grounds in Mumbai, that is Mahalakshmi Racecourse, Goregaon Nesco ground, and on the MMRDA BKC ground. Now we are going to add 200 bedded ICUs in our field hospitals. Something more radical that the government is contemplating, and that is for next about few weeks, all the private and public ICU beds will be allotted by the government, and 80% of the entire bed population in the hospitals of Mumbai will be reserved for COVID work. Both sectors will work, public as well as private. And I think this is a very pragmatic, prudent step that we have done.
So, sir, that's why we've kept the topic today as whether we can coexist with COVID going forward. And I guess when our honorable Prime Minister declared the lockdown early enough, we as financial people thought that the choice is between life and livelihood, and rightly so, a choice of life has been taken. So do you think now are we getting into a zone where we are ready to also worry about livelihood and go back to work, reduce the lockdown and so on? Or do you think there is still time for that to happen, especially in Maharashtra, Mumbai and densely populated areas?
No, I think, Ajit, there is still some more time to go. I know how impatient we have become, and that's quite natural. I mean, we have never been sitting in the homes with our wives for 6 weeks. I think that is toxic and intolerant enough. Few are lucky guys like us who are in the health sector who are more outside than in our own homes. But that apart, I think till we reach a situation that the number of new cases being diagnosed start reducing on a daily basis, the number of beds available in the hospital become more than their demand. The number of vacant beds in the various facilities that we have created slowly start increasing, and the number of deaths that we witness every day fall within about 10 or 15. And I hope all these things to happen by about, say, next 2 weeks. I think that's the time when we can think of a unlocking of this lockdown. And that also, in my mind, will have to be a very graded step down exercise. It's like getting down a staircase step by step. If we try to jump quickly, miss a step, I think we are more likely to tumble. And there are enough examples in various cities in the world that the second wave of corona have hit them when they unlocked it in a rapid manner. So the de-escalation is as important or perhaps more important than the escalation.
Sir, in that context, there are following questions, more medical, in my opinion. One of the thoughts that we had in mind was in the past, whenever we have seen a bout of conjunctivitis happen, during the early days of conjunctivitis, the severity of the infection is very high. And towards the end of that bout, the severity of infection is slightly lower. And then the bout sort of ends. Is that a behavior that one should expect in COVID also, or that's not? So is the virus now receding in its aggressiveness, or like you said, it has always been a timid virus, so it doesn't matter, and we should worry about co-mortality than the virus itself?
I think, Ajit, all of us will have to learn to coexist with this virus. I have no false hope or myth that we will be living hereafter in a COVID-free world. It is unlikely. What it will change is, it will change some of the surgical habits. It will change some of the medical habits. That if there is a fever, well, all these days we used to do Vidal test and some other test. Now we will say, oh, get a COVID test done. So that is how it will change us. But we will have to get ourselves down, up with control of our comorbidities, better nutrition, and better immunity. And whatever is required for that, we will have to aim it for a long-term sustainable existence with this virus.
So, in that context, when we are now entering the monsoon season in the city, we are probably maybe 3 weeks, 4 weeks away from a typical monsoon season. Is that a cause of concern for the medical fraternity? Because normally diseases are slightly on the higher side in the monsoon season, and we are sort of a few weeks away from the same. Is that a cause of worry, or that really is not going to impact us that badly?
No, for me, it's a real cause of concern because I fear we may get COVID plus malaria, COVID plus dengue, COVID plus leptospirosis, COVID plus typhoid. Such combinations are known. They are likely to happen, though COVID and malaria may not coexist because that's one of the inference of early less number of cases being affected in the African world, where malaria is kind of endemic. There the COVID was less. But let's see what happens to us. We will have to be prepared, as I told you, when we investigate a patient with a battery of investigations. Not only we will investigate him for a dengue antigen, but we will also investigate him for a COVID antigen.
And sir, in this whole information overload that we are seeing as general public, is there a cure? And you did mention that we should learn to coexist with COVID, but is there a cure on the horizon, or this is something that will keep on happening, and we'll learn how to live with it?
See, there are 4 drugs, and I must make a mention of them because I make an appeal to your community as well as to the entire learned community in India that medical fraternity needs 4 drugs to fight this particular menace. One drug is called as tocilizumab. It's a tongue twisting name. Its cousin brother is called as itolizumab. These are both drugs to be used when the patient is in the hospital and serious. There is one more drug called as remdesivir, which is being credited 50% good, 50% not so good in the US. But this is also an injectable drug. And there is one drug called as favipiravir. This is oral drug. Now, these drugs have different mechanisms of action. While the first lot works in the hospital, the second lot that I mentioned, remdesivir and the favipiravir, these change the character of the RNA of that virus and stop it from duplicating and multiplying. Medical fraternity in India needs these drugs. We don't have it. There are companies who are completely ready to produce it, and I'm literally begging, along with my task force and my entire medical fraternity, to the state and the central government that fast forward the acceptance and availability of these drugs. See, whenever a drug comes into market, it has to go through a very circadian process of 3-level trials, animal experimentation, then human experimentation, clinical trials, but this all takes time. And I think today we have a race against time if you want to save lives. So yes, allow us initially in few cases as on compassionate grounds, and going ahead, allow us as an accelerated kind of trial that we will be able to use and produce these drugs, because it's not only the availability, but the drugs also have to be affordable. And the drugs will become affordable if they are made in India. And I'm sure that we are capable enough of making them and in fact exporting it outside, just like PPEs and other things. So that is one of my near future hopes that yes, we need these things to fight this menace in a better way.
Definitely, sir. I think that is a great input.
And of course, let me complete the vaccine issue. That is something that all of us are looking at. Now, Serum Institute of India, based in Pune, hopes to bring out sufficient number of dosages by September. About 200 different types of vaccines are being tried all around the globe. Several countries, either individually or in combination, symbiosis with each other, trying to produce a vaccine. So the vaccine should be around the corner. But you know, Ajit, what has happened with some of the vaccines are that the virus is always smarter than the human. And therefore, once something comes, virus might just alter one small corner of its shell and a new polymer emerges, a new serotype emerges. and then the vaccine cannot work against that. So vaccine provides some hope, but it's not the only hope. Prevention, social distancing, changing your norms of behavior, making a mask as your fashion accessory from here on and wearing it consistently, and denying meeting people physically unless and until a sufficient distance is kept. I think those are the hallmarks of preventive success.
No, this is absolutely, and looks like, sir, this is one type of impact that we have, which is prevention is better than cure. We have always grown up learning that sentence, but it looks like in a situation like this, we have to focus on this. And in that context, the government will now looks like the healthcare system will start more focusing on prevention of such diseases, or do you think curative aspects are something that we should focus on?
No, I think lot of things have to change. Now, let me take little perspective of your financial aspect, because medicine without finance cannot exist. It has to be available and it has to be accessible and affordable to people.
Yes,
now,
sir.
for that, not only you should make things in India, but you should make things in India and don't tax them too much. You must, I have repeatedly told it to government that just like some of the autonomous organizations like MMRDA, MSRTC, and we have seen the good results of that. A time has come that we should form an autonomous corporation for health sector dispensing, at least in Maharashtra. There should be an autonomous body who should decide what is the need of the state, what do people need, and it should not be rooted through the red tapeism of the government. Well, it is subject to audit at every level, no issues about that. But it is the pace that matters rather than the red tape that cuts it. That's point number one. Second thing, I made a plea that we made special economic zones for industry. And we have seen the best results out of it. Why can't you create SEZs in 50 acres, 70 acres outside Mumbai, just on the outskirts? Give us a land. We will set up public as well as private sector hospitals over there. We will set up small autonomous units that will bring out the things that we need in a small scale industry. And then that will make the thing better economically, as well as we will be able to export. The best example of this comes from ophthalmology. When Aurobindo Eye Institute started, and they have a pharmacy, they have the factories to support the lens. The lens, which is more than about $2,000, is available for less than 2,000 rupees in India, and the quality is unmatched, absolutely. So I think these are the kind of supports that the health sector industry will need. Otherwise, the health is going to become phenomenally expensive. See, we'll be using PPEs, we'll be using masks, we'll be using so many disinfectants. The cost will eventually get passed on to the client, to the customer. And that will make the health sector very, very expensive. Plus, we exist in a country which contributes about 1.3 to 1.4% of its GDP, when US spends about 17 or 18% of its GDP on the health. I've been saying n number of years that come on, give us up to about 7, 8, 9%. On the backdrop of pandemic, the day before yesterday, I heard, yes, Indian government will consider 10%. 10% is a huge figure. I don't expect dreams to get unfolded on one day. But yes, if you plan it over next 3 or 5 years, 2%, 2%, 2%, 2%, we will perhaps be able to reach that particular dream in next about 4 years, and which is more than required for us. The second problem when it comes to financing health sector comes is out-of-pocket expenses. And that happens because the insurance coverage is poor horizontally as well as vertically. I'll explain what I mean. A horizontal coverage covers a large number of populace. Today, if I ask an average middle class, oh, have you got an LIC? Yes, sir, I have got an LIC. Have you got a health cover? Half of them will say no. And half of them, if I further ask them, how much you have got? Saab hai na, 2 lakh ka hai. 2 lakhs of rupees get over in 2 minutes nowadays in healthcare when the expenses start. And nothing less than about 10 lakhs is really speaking adequate to take care of its vertical penetration. So this vertical depth and the horizontal spread of insurance, both things will have to go up. We must also learn the lessons of managed healthcare that happened in US. Everything is not good, everything is not glorious. And therefore, I think the traditional ways of doing health sector dispensing, the relationship that the doctor and the patients had, I think that needs to be revived and taken care of in the years to come.
And sir, in that context, would you suggest a family physician kind of model, which used to be popular earlier, but is not seen that much in the current context, which will help in sort of early diagnosis and so on and so forth. Is that something that one should look at again?
It's a huge loss on us that every aspiring third MBBS student, if I ask him, what do you want to become? He would say, I want to become a surgeon like you. The country does not need surgeons like me. Country needs good family physicians, good community medicine specialists in the community. The best part is you become a surgeon. You can even become a super specialist surgeon. But your consciousness about community health should never ever go away. And India needs good family physicians and good community level people who would work in the community, understand the meaning of an unuttered word, see the unshed tear, and hear an unsaid word.
No, this is very useful, sir. I think discussions can happen for a long time. I know that you have a lot more to handle as the head of the task force. But one dimension that I wanted to touch upon before we get into closing remarks is that and you mentioned in a little bit joking fashion that we all are tired of sitting at home with our wives. Our wives are also probably a little getting tired of us and so on. The question is, are there psychological impacts of something like this which also impact the general well-being of a human being? Because half of the illness is, like you mentioned earlier, is also the will to survive and do something better. How do we tackle those kind of issues in a pandemic like this?
Yeah, so you asked very right. I mean, everybody is getting tired, people get irritable, and then you can make an erroneous judgment when you are irritated, and that's dangerous. So there are active efforts being done of counseling to the doctors, even to the task force chief and the colleagues, by trained psychotherapists, by counselors, and by psychiatrists. And we are actually undergoing that particular process. For example, I'm the chief of Aga Khan Foundation of Health of India and the Prince Ali Khan Hospital. So we have a global presence with about 300 health units around the globe. So we are expected to undergo these sessions on a webinar once in a week. And I think it helps us.
Okay, very interesting. But as general public, do you think that we should also do something like this in terms of just keeping our motivation levels higher and so on? Is that something that is useful?
You're very right. And what motivates me may not motivate you, and your motivation may be something different. Motivation is one of the most difficult things, I think. And one can be self-motivated. And it could be listening to a good ghazal, it could be listening to a good music, Lata Didi's song, it could be watching a good drama or things, could be reading a good book, any one of these things. But each one has to find out what motivates him and then pursue it.
Right. Sir, maybe in the last phase, you did mention a lot of precautions like masks and so on. But as a child, we all grew up with a saying an apple a day keeps doctor away. Is there a apple that we should know to keep COVID away?
Well, whether it is apple or peach or pomegranate, whatever is that, I'm looking for it. That's all that I can say you just now.
Okay. Good, sir. This has been extremely useful, and really on behalf of Equirus and the entire team at Equirus, I don't know how to thank you, but really thanks so much for your time. I know it's late at night, so I don't want to hold you too long before we end this discussion. But any parting comments, sir, which you think we should know about the pandemic, about the general thinking, and so on? Any words of advice will be very useful.
I think, Ajit, this pandemic has changed the world a lot. And I think it changed when I introspect myself. I think it has changed me as an individual. I am writing a new book now, and that will be called as In the Clutches of a Dragon. And that's on the pandemic. So when I'm doing the research for the book, as I'm working simultaneously, I find the various myths, scientific or unscientific, which were blown. I read anecdotes. I read stories where humanity was seen. I'm pained to see photographs that perhaps we are witnessing the second largest migration after the partition that the country has witnessed in the last few days. I've seen scenes which move your heart when people give food to others. And I also get disturbed when I watch on television that on a railway platform, for a bag full of some loaves of bread, there are fights amongst the hungry laborers. I think this pandemic on a wider scale has touched the humanity and has uprooted us and told us that, look, guys, your foundations were not solid. Incidentally, one of the books that I could lay my hands on is called as Corona and Christ. And this comes from a philosopher who mentions about various principles in Christianity. And it says that, look, when the foundations are not rock solid, such things happen and they virtually uproot you. I think this pandemic has moved many of us as human beings. We have always thought of cars, bungalows, properties, farmhouses. What good use they are if you are not there. And if you unfortunately die of COVID death, not even your relatives are around to carry your coffin. I mean, that kind of what I can say, a frustrating experience of the human existence has been established beyond doubt by this particular pandemic. And I want to reascertain my faith in humanity through my medical practice.
So that's really great. I think lot of good messages for people like us. I'm sure our colleagues will be very happy to and lot to learn from whatever you have said in the short interview. But I know that time is sort of running out for our interview time. But would love to do something as a second round whenever this whole thing settles down. Would be more of a looking back type of discussion rather than how what did we learn in the pandemic and so on and so forth. And I think it will be very useful to get your thoughts. Some of the messages we will definitely take back to the financial community and to the business community. I think the most important thing is just manage your thought process, focus on humanity, and hopefully things will be all right. Once again, sir, on behalf of Equirus and my entire team, thank you so much for your time and your inputs. We would probably wrap up this round of conversation with Dr. Oak with a great thank you from all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.